Cool. Well, hello and welcome. My name is Professor Barrett Swanson. I'm a professor of creative writing here at UW-Whitewater in the Languages and Literatures program, and I am a co-curator of the Warhawk reading series with Professor Nick Gulig. If you don't know, the Warhawk reading series is a two-time a semester reading where Nick and I have been steadfastly devoted to bringing the most exciting and electric young writers we can think of to our campus and allowing them to read for us and interact with our students. And we couldn't be more excited about tonight's guest, the poet Carolina Ebeid. And I'm going to pass things off to my colleague, Nick Gulig, to more formally introduce her.
Thanks, Barrett. It's really wonderful to be able to introduce Carolina. She is she's a poet I've been following for quite a while, and it's really wonderful to reconnect with her. And it was really wonderful to spend time with her work in an effort to write a brief introduction to it. It's Wednesday morning in America. For the obvious reasons, the heavy shadow of the election hangs in my office air, a kind of half-formed consequence. At this unclear moment in the day, the president remains the president. By the time we're all together in the safety of our isolated rooms, our faces framed by our computers and listening to poems that might be different, but also maybe not. It's difficult to tell. In either case, and for reasons that remain obscure, I find myself returning to the world that I grew up in, the elsewhere of a simpler Wisconsin where I was born and raised, into which my memory, a slowly closing window, is the only port of access. At the same time, I find myself looking forward through the clouded lens of deep uncertainty and doubt. Home, of course, that feeling of belonging to a culture and to a place, is likely never there but for the fact that one is young, sheltered by their parents and protected. Now that I'm a parent, on a morning like today, the election looming over everything, I wonder what Wisconsin will become. When my two daughters are finally old enough, what will they look out upon and see? I'm turning back and forth, facing my phone in one moment, the empty page the next. The wait is terrible. What is there to say? In a poem aptly titled The Terrible Years, Carolina Ebeid suggests that January wears two faces, but maybe today, in the wake of the election, she also means November. One of them, she says, you'll call the future, the other history. Both are elsewhere. As is so often the case, I turn to others when it isn't clear what I should think, how I should feel. Art, I try to tell myself, is a moment of recognition, when one life following the lines slips into another, not so much the assertion of identity, but a blurring of its edges, an invitation or a form of welcoming. In the terrible years, the speaker tries to do this, attempts to trace the boundary of a place no longer possible, a man no longer there. This is the elsewhere of photographs, she says, in which memory turns angular, deco-edged as here in the gold film light of Baghdad, 1976, my father, younger, ambitious, political, on his way to a meeting with Saddam, or the elsewhere of an orchard growing. It is difficult, I think, to speak like this, both to and from the non-location of a place that isn't there to touch, to imagine one world while waiting firmly in another. And yet, as a reader of Ebeid's work, as someone specter-struck by the effervescent landscapes of her description, I find a kind of haunted fullness in my being there, suspended in the in-between peripheries and listening. In this case, the voice that finds me is the murmur of an other, the speaker of the poem in whose tilted recollections of a family photograph I feel a strange affinity. I, of course, have never been to Baghdad, nor have I met the speaker's father, and yet the elsewhere of a distant time and place and person asserts itself into the present, a kind of ghost within the moment here where corpses begin to flower in a dream corrected by the daylight. And so I stare into my phone again, its bright technology linking me to elsewhere. And I wonder how the speaker gets there. It's Wednesday morning, and the dream I have is also one of a correction, but it's difficult to tell. The future isn't ours to see. These, of course, are the lyrics of a song, the first poem I remember hearing. My mother used to sing it to me when I was about my daughter's age. The title of the lullaby, Que Sera, Sera, made popular by Doris Day, translates loosely into English as whatever will be, will be. It's been 3 decades now, and still I wonder why my mother, a Thai immigrant, chose that song to sing to her children in the evenings as she rocked them. In my memory, I can hear her voice struggling to arrive at the elsewhere of a second language, the uncertain sound that she became in half-light, moving back and forth between a multitude of tongues, the loose translation of one word into another, easing the transition toward an elsewhere only knowable in sleep, its red residence dreaming in my head. In the inconsistent slippage of my mother's singing, I, who was cradled there, took refuge in the overlap, in what Ebeid perennially refers to in her own work as the folds that tether one word loosely to another. In a poem called Video with Silk Scarf in Slow Motion Running Backwards, the speaker returns again to a familiar backward gaze. So long now, writes Ebeid, I've searched the etymology of words. Sometimes I can only read them in their atomized parts and leaf bits, the wind hole in a window, and implicate and duplicate inexplicably. I hear only the plick, 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 which are its folds. This moment feels crucial to Ebeid's poetics, which I tend to see as a kind of sifting through our language for a common unifying force, a sound, perhaps, to hold the words together, to hold the world together. By breaking language into its atomized parts, the poet creates an opening, a space between wind and hold that speaks more clearly to what a window is, a barrier that holds the wind at bay on the one hand, but also, and at the same time, this barrier grants us access to the world on the other side. Said differently, the window folds one world over into another, both clarifying and obscuring their distinction. Maybe it is moments such as these, so uniquely common to the landscape of Ebeid's poetry, that help me feel at home in a state and country in which I've come to wonder if I'm welcome. Hers is a work that promises words can come together and connect. But until they do, Ebeid's poems seem to also promise it is possible to live and breathe and even love within the distances between them. If language is the world to which it points, Ebeid reminds us that we can take the world apart and pay attention to the quiet folds that language holds in common. In doing so, she suggests we learn to speak again and be again, a kind of resurrection in the aftermath. Thus, for Ebeid, the limits of a language are not in fact the limits of our world. Quite the contrary. For her, it is rather through these limits, from the places where our language fails, where the poet breaks the alphabet apart, that a wider, more welcoming world arises, revealing a unifying stillness, a silence living there and still intact at the vibrant center of a word. For Ebeid, the poet's task is to listen closely to the whisper, to mold it slowly into song. My muteness, she instructs, murmur and mutter, be more than mum, my susurrus, be a turbulent chorus, be a noisy throat clearing. A poet of Cuban and Palestinian descent, Carolina Ebeid is the author of You Asked Me to Talk About the Interior, selected as one of the 10 best poems of 2016. She's received grants and awards from the Stadler Center for Poetry at Bucknell University, Loaf, Canto-Mundo, the Lannan Foundation, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Please join me in welcoming Carolina Ebeid.
Oh, Nick, thank you. I always feel very dumbstruck when I hear you read your prose, your just beautifully exquisite prose. And to be like within those lines, to be read so deeply is truly such a gift. And I wasn't expecting it at all. So I thank you. And thanks so much for inviting me. Happy to spend a little bit of this anxious night with you in this grid. I want to believe that the shape of a grid is somewhat sacred, sacred ground. Having to face my screen every day, it is, you know, a moment like this where we're configured and seems very meaningful. So thank you. I'm going to read the poems that I sent you here. And they are largely from my new manuscript, which I'm calling Hide. And they, it's hard to really summarize, and I want to resist even summarizing what it is about. But these are poems that I've written over the past, since I've been in Denver, really. So over the past 6 years, and that soon will be drawing to a close. The manuscript, that is, as I'm nearing its end. So I'm really happy anytime I get to read from them because they feel still very fresh. And anyone listening, I just want to give you the freedom to lie down, sit away from the screen and let it be an auditory experience. You don't have to look at my face. Video with silk scarf in slow-mo running backwards. So long now, I've searched the etymology of words. Sometimes I can only read them in their atomized parts, in leaf bits. The wind hold in a window, in implicate, in duplicate, inexplicably, I hear only the plick, 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 which are its folds. To do. Prepare a choreography of the way your hands move when you're angry. Something about seeing mask after mask on my feed, mostly made by hand, mostly out of shirts. Erin Rose will sew mine out of a palm tree pattern. Here, the folds of fabric swifting round legs and movements, click, click, click. Every day, I compose digital miniatures. Jeff calls them that because I arrange them on the surface of my phone. How little the human, how little the hum. Getting closer in to see the minute movements of your face. Annotations for a memorial. Something so light, almost nothing. Not a list of violences nor reports from beauty. One person looks up, and then another after another looking up in the same direction. Who took this picture of fight ghost town, this is Palestine? graffitied in Hebron, Al-Khalil, who wrote, "They bring that desert stuff to our world." My father writes on my wall, "I remember those birds. They used to fly by the thousands to the wheat fields. We call them zarzur in Arabic. It begins to waste like a bar of soap turned in your hand, the repeated word. The boy spins into a curtain, whirl like smoke, bewitchingly out of the mouth. Grief builds a settlement inside you. When Eric played the album of abnormal heart sounds recorded for medical students, I felt sorry, and how the brain can't hold an archive of every sound you'd like to hear again. You could listen by holding your hand to your ear. Grief may redraft your whole anatomy. Harbor opens in your chest, a cargo ship drifting out of you, seen and tracked by satellite. The terrible years. January wears two faces. You will call one future, the other history. Both are elsewhere. There is the elsewhere photographs in which memory turns angular, decal-edged, as here in the gold film light of Baghdad. 1976, my father, younger, ambitious, political, on his way to a meeting with Saddam. Or the elsewhere of an orchard growing quince, the elsewhere of your birth event, of your dying, its marble hours, the nothing gentle elsewhere of dashcam footage, the elsewhere in the street view of the former lover's new address aglow in your palm. I remember the elsewhere of Peter Jennings' voice, reporting from Baghdad, and the round city of Baghdad with its mechanical birds and their wind-powered notes from a tree made entirely of gold, is another elsewhere, another history. Put your ear to this window, like listening into a chest. Deep breath in, hold. All the horrible days arriving, listen. The children stretch their spans before tombstones, practicing fame, pretending corpse life, which autocorrects to cop's life, and elsewhere where corpses begin to flower. For a decade, my father shouted in his sleep, words like darts nicking the velvet dark around his ears. And elsewhere takes up its red residence in his head. Throw open now, a dream brain for the screen. Up on the screen, see how it dims and shimmers. A city of quadrants and zones. It thinks it is awake, the dream corrected by daylight. This is a poem that resulted from something that I like to do with my students, which is to talk about, one of the most basic units of the poem, which is the line. One of the most basic units, but I think one of the most hard to define with any singular definition. And so I have them try to come up with a line being like some other kind of figure. And so then I made my own list. I can't hear you when you're screaming. Line, like a piece of twine. Line like a piece of dry grass, plank, nail, a finger pointing there, a finger shush. Line like a cut sewn up, a rupture stitched. Like a bicycle cutting snow, a game of telephone. Line like a shift of cord between cans, mouth to ear repetitions. A human chain saving a driver from rush flood. A barrette, a strand of hair latched in. We are each of us from somewhere else. A loft for city miles, the telephone wire. Line like City Avenue traffic, dotted with shit avenue where the horses have been. Horses become beautiful noise. Line like string tied to a balloon, string tied to a door handle, tied to a tooth. Every time there's a boundary, we must appoint the messenger to cross it. Line like the space between a camera and the calamity. Line like an x-ray rib, like a track of menstrual blood down the thigh. Parade spectator line, trombone slide, a column of air inside, a column of air with its spit trap. I can't hear you when you're whispering. A sunwind line, a line of hair blown into the camera eye. This poem comes from the poem that I'm calling Disambiguation of Miriam, comes from a section of the book called Drapery Studies. And the title Drapery Studies gives me a certain kind of freedom to work with fragment, I think, in a new way. And I say that, I mean, the reason why I think that it, engenders these little fragments is because the work of an artist's sketchbook itself, where studies are made, I find really fascinating. I think speaks to something of my own sense of poetics, where if someone like Leonardo da Vinci, who is about to make a sculpture made of marble, would make these drapery studies, would make these drawings that would show fabric, laying over a foot, or the way it folds across the waist. And he would draw these again and again, and they would appear like little body parts, fragments of these ghosts. And the idea of making something so flowing and full of a kind of rhythmic movement when it's ultimately going to be made of something so much heft as marble really inspires me. And so, but these are fragments of something like wedding dresses that are marriages that are somewhat violent and dangerous for the wearer of the dress. And so hence this is Disambiguation of Miriam. In 2017, activists strung up wedding dresses between the palm trees along Beirut's seafront, protesting a law allowing a rapist to escape punishment if he married the victim. Unlike eyes, the ears don't shut when sleep treads in. Unlike I, the ear don't shh when sleep treads in. Unlike eyes, the ears hunt din. Ick eyes, the ears do read. Ow, I, in that little pain. You lied, yes. Keyed shut, yes. Keyed shut, we slept red. Live earth whelp. You lied. Ears shut in. Years, years, The last two poems that I'll read are around the work and life of Ana Mendieta, Cuban-born American artist, multimedia artist, who died at a young age at 36. And she was someone who made work in a time when everybody was working in a kind of minimalist art, or in a time when there were these set of artists making huge land art sculptures. She was, by contrast, making what she called body earth art. And she would make these silhouettes with her own naked body on a surface of mud or sand. And she would leave this outline impression of her body and fill that silhouette with animal blood or feathers or other organic material. Sometimes she would line it with gunpowder and set it alight and then record that and come back to these often very solitary places where she would make these siluetas and document their decay. One of these works, she makes a kind of tomb-like shape on a very bare wall with again, animal blood. And she writes, "There is a devil inside me," which sounds so metal. And so this poem is answering to that and to the many guises of what a devil is, one of them being Lucifer, the angel of light. There is a devil inside me. Did you carry around the matin star? Did you hold forest fire in one hand? Would you wake to radiate, shimmer, gleam, lucero light? Through the morning, would you measure the wingspan of an idea taking off? And by night, would you read by the light of your own torso? Did you hear through the curtains, through folds and folds of fabric, a low down voice? How are you fallen from? How are you cut down to the ground? Would gunpowder flash up in the other hand? Were you the most beautiful of them, the most beautiful, beautiful, beauty, full, be out, I, full, beautiful? Did the sky flutter and flower like bridal shrouds? Did a dog rise in the east in it? Did a wolf set in the west? Were they a thirsty pair? And was there a meadow? How many flowers to pick? And when no flowers, were you gathering bone chips and feathers and mud? Was music a circle that spun? Did you spin it in reverse? Was your singing a rushlight, pyre light, a conflagration of dragonflies rushing out from your fire throat? Did you lie down in the snow? Did it soften and thaw into a pool of your shape? Did you whisper to the graven thing, whisper a many low-down phrase? How are you falling, my beautiful? Would you trek closer? Would they trek closer, the animals? A grand iridium thirst, each arriving with their soft velour mouths to drink your silhouette. An important fact of Mendieta's life is that she died very tragically. In some ways, what one imagines her corpse looking like is very much something that was a principal part of her art practice, which was focused on the body and blood and, you know, material, organic material. And she plummeted out of her New York City apartment window, 34 flights, and, you know, died pretty quickly. And her artist husband, Carl Andre, was, you know, arrested, accused, and but later acquitted in a lengthy trial. It divided the art world in the 80s, and still to this day, and especially even more recently, he's just not really allowed to present his minimalist work in the United States without a really hearty kind of protest wherever he shows, with the attendant question, where is Ana Mendieta? You know, usually either projected on a wall or disseminated in flyers, something like that, some way of disrupting. And I say that because I think the fact that she falls and the fact of this very violent relationship is, I think, at the heart of this next poem, called The Devil Thread. Super 8 color, silent film burning, dry grass in human shape, a funerary rite, an event in the earth to be repeated. What was it like? Sounded as if from some other narrative. Ana Mendieta's film, Blood Sign, March 1974, Iowa, opens with a still shot on a white interior wall as Mendieta walks through the center of the frame. She wears a white long-sleeve pullover and brown pants. A pan filled with animal's blood sits on the ground to the side, to the right of her. She dips her hands and forearms into the painter's pan filled with blood from an animal and begins drawing with her arms as the tool itself. She draws an arc, a narrow arc that encompasses her 4.8-foot stature. Speak of the devil. May you be in heaven a half hour before the devil in the numbers, before the devil sees your papers, devil in the head, devil will find an idle mind for idle hands. The devil is beating his wife. Look out the window, cry sun rain, cry out sun shower at noon. Who permitted this? The most blissful way to die is by an angel kissing the spirit out of your mouth. The center of the arc. She is writing the words, and only until she walks away can we see the entirety of the phrase, there is a devil inside me. She darkens the arc with another and another downward stroke of the wall, soaking her arms again with the substance once coursing through pigs. The blank space is no longer imposing or ugly. She has made it a personal zone she could fit her form into. As she walks out of the frame, the arc resembles an epitaph. The most painful way the soul leaves a body, like thorns pulled through a bale of cotton. Ain't no devil in hell gonna walk on the Jesus in me. Can't look inside me. It's like taking a picture of the sun. Más sabe el diablo por viejo que por diablo. Look out the window. The devil is beating his wife. Do you like your hell as white, as crypt, as sulfur, as handbasket, as fire, as frozen? You and me and the devil make. Listening to Mendieta's voiceover play in the empty theater, I thought to begin a descent narrative. There is the quality of Mendieta's voice in my memory now that materializes, like a carving in the sky before it changes shape and fades out. I remember putting my voice in blank cassette tapes, the red record button. My voice would spin in meters of black ribbon. One's own voice is made strange when played back, or when it's heard underwater, unrecognizable when it's heard in hell. La carne para el diablo, los huesos para el Señor. No man is alone with the woman when the shaitan is the third. Las tres voces, three filthy mouths, hang a mirror on the porch to keep the devil away. To keep away from evil, you must sing to it. Tell the truth and shame the devil. Let me loose. There is no stranger date of the devil. Look out the window. The devil is beating his wife. Devil na, devil nor. Do you devil a bit? My muteness, murmur and mutter. Be more than mum, my susurrus. Be a turbulent chorus. Be a noisy throat clearing. Do you devil a bit? Devil light your cigarette? Do you devil a doubt? Devil among the tailors, devil a penny, devil a wit. Devil can cite poetry for his own. Drink from the devil's ink pot. Devil float in devil flowers. Devil plays the sorrow tunes. Why should the devil have all the good music? Okay. Thank you for listening. I'm excited to talk to all of you now.
Thank you, Carolina. It's really nice to have you back in my life. It's been a while, and it's really nice to hear your poems again.
Thank you.
I want to turn this over to our students for the sake of knowing when we should ask questions. Maybe we'll just start in the order that y'all are appearing on my screen, which would mean Hannah, do you mind asking your two questions first, and then Lede, and then Katie, and then Michael? Does that work for everyone? Hannah, Lede, Katie, Michael? Okay.
Hi, Hannah.
Okay. Can someone go first? I'm looking for my questions. I lost them. I'm really sorry.
Okay. Yeah, whoever wants to go first, really.
Lede, can you go first?
Hey, Lede.
Hi, my full name is, can you guys hear me?
I can't hear you very well, no.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, computer problems. But hi, my full name is Lademiana. I am the poetry editor for the Muse. I'm just gonna get right to the questions, I suppose, because, okay. I know some of my colleagues have already asked these questions, but we're just gonna go for it. Okay, so in your poem, which I can hear you when I can't hear you when you're screaming. That's one of my favorite poems from the collection. And so my question was, what were you thinking when you started to write this poem? I noticed that that the shape of the poem looks like a square composed of lines. And I feel like you did this because you wanted to emphasize quote unquote line in this poem, which every element has. In some way it is incorporated, line is incorporated. One of my favorite lines was like the string tied like a track of menstrual blood down the thigh. I could see that. And so I just wanted to know, do you view life linearly, or do you believe that life feels better when it is experienced in a chaos kind of way?
Chaos right now does not feel comfortable at all. But those are really good questions. Lade, thank you. I will say that, no, I don't think of life as linear right now. The shape, and this isn't really answering your question, except that I see life as this kind of gesture, a swing, which is perhaps part of a circle, but we don't get to see the whole. That's where I rest on the shape of life, since you asked. But the shape of the poem, I would say, is following a shape that's very traditional to poetry, in that I mean, even the very etymology of verse is what an ox does on a field, like making furrows. Will go one way across and then turn, and then go another way across and turn. The poem itself is written in prose, except that I've just tightened a little the margins so that it could be more square-like. But I did have in mind these kinds of furrows that are made. And so since the poem itself is constantly turning, I wanted, I guess, that seemed like the only shape that the poem wanted to be in. Funny you should say that, though, that you should ask this question, because today I've been working with the circle and like pulling my hair out, trying to make a square literally fit into a circle with Adobe. And that's so hard. So hard and so easy at the same time. I just can't square it away in my mind. I hope I've answered your question.
I had another one. That was just one question. Is that okay, Nick? Hannah? Okay, cool. So my other question, fairly shorter than the first, the terrible years, I was really taken by the word elsewhere, and I felt like it was neither a physical or a mental component. I felt like it resembled more of like a place where humans go to escape harm or danger, or just like this infinite spot in space, and it's just like a limbo. But yeah, so my question is, what in this poem was elsewhere trying to speak to or signify, if it is definable, I suppose?
I love the question because it's impossible for me to answer right now, especially under time constraint. But just hearing you talk about the elsewhere, I think of you being in an elsewhere, and everyone else on this grid being in an elsewhere, but we are at the very same time digitally together. That's exactly how I'm going to answer it. I don't know. Was there a particular elsewhere for the poem? I think that memory has a whole set of elsewheres that were at some point could be geographically pinpointed. And I'm just interested in the kind of, you know, the word I'm searching for is when stars are put into a figure, constellation, that's the word. Yes, I think of those memories as being constellated. Yeah, I hope I've answered your question. You're very difficult ones, challenging, inspiring ones. Thank you. Who else is next?
I can go now.
Okay. Hi.
Hello. Yeah, your poetry is lovely. Thank you for sharing it with us. So I'm just gonna go off of Lade's last question because I also had a question in the poem The Terrible Years. So I think Baghdad is elsewhere in the poem as well. So I was wondering how you view Baghdad. Is it a physical or just an immaterial place for you? Do you have a personal relationship with it? And or is Baghdad a placeholder for something else?
No, that's a good question too. I think certainly Baghdad is a real place, and has been for, you know, centuries. In the poem, I think that it is a kind of synecdoche, you know, part for a whole, for something of my early childhood. In fact, a childhood that I don't remember. But when I was 6 months old, I went to live there with my father. He sort of moved the family there. But I was there for 3 months, I think, at most, because the family also included my Cuban grandmother. And life was just untenable because they didn't speak the language. And so it's fraught with, you know, my father's own history, which I'm still trying to understand. So I think I like the name placeholder because in that it can hold all of those ideas and troubled emotions that I have, complex ones.
Yeah, that's very insightful. So here's my last question. It's okay. So grief takes a very concrete and physical form in your poems. Specifically in Annotations for a Memorial, you say that grief may redraft your whole anatomy. It's so like grief is present in the explicit utterance of grief, but also in the way that words are arranged in your poetry. So I was wondering why grief takes up this form in your writing, and in what ways does grief haunt your poetry?
Well, I guess I think of words themselves as having these physical properties, and certainly histories. And I think, I mean, I know that I was very much thinking of a future in which my father, who is still very much alive, won't be alive, and how that would affect my writing. And that's just a personal answer or interpretation of your question that I can give you. Yeah, that seems like an essay question too, like Lade. These are all essay questions, which I am like noting. So thank you for, they're quite inspiring.
Okay, who's next?
I think I'm next.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you again for doing this reading. It's been a really wonderful experience and a nice break from current events, so thank you. All right, my longer question here is about your poem, Dead, Dead Darlings, which I really loved. And I love the way you described sentences as alive, imagined, and changing beings. This poem to me captured the inexplicable power of words to transcend their meaning and become the manifestation of sensations from the beyond. This ability of the sentence is difficult to describe, and yet this poem was able to capture it. Throughout all the poems of yours that I've read, each sentence seems to follow this idea of representing something otherwise inexplicable. How do sentences, as presented in Dead, Dead Darlings, contribute to poetry's role of transcribing what is infinite into something finite, such as words on a page?
Wow. I suppose first I should say that the sentence is sometimes really oppressive. I mean, it is the word for what a body of law can, you know, could give out and completely change your life. And so I think about that kind of oppressiveness, but I also think in some ways to put something down in words already just cuts out so much possibility. And I love the moment when an idea and a rhythm and a kind of rhythm in some sort of like sonic pleasure takes hold, and I'm suddenly starting to write a poem. And then I write it down in some sort of syntactic pattern. And again, it sometimes can feel oppressive because it cuts off all possibility and sometimes pleasure. So that poem, I forget what the title is now, because I wanted to make reference to what Allen Ginsberg says: you have to kill your darlings, meaning you have to excise the lovely language from a piece if it's extraneous to the piece. So in other words, like just omitting things, and I just never throw things away. I will take them out from poems and just reserve them in some great notebook. I hope that answers your question, because I think I understood your question, and I think that I've answered it.
Yes, you're doing great. We're throwing pretty deep questions at you right now. Thank you so much. I just have one more. This one's shorter. In an interview I read that you had with the Kenyon Review, you mentioned the idea of oniric action in a poem and that poems can follow dream logic. So my question is, how do you think poetic logic and dream logic allow us to make connections with that which feels unknown to us?
I guess there's that wonderful space when you're not fully awake, but you're not asleep. I guess it's called the hypno. So there's that's in between space when you're going into sleep and coming out. It's the hypnagogic and the hypnopompic. And those, they're not spaces exactly. They're not still like spaces can be. But it's like a procession. And I think that literally is connecting. You can see the line being connected from dream logic to being awake, because I think poetry does happen when we are. Poetry is made with the waking mind. But if you can tap into those spaces, it's wonderful. And I haven't been able to exactly tap in. And that's largely because I sleep with my phone by my side. And so I need to break that habit. But yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Katie.
Hi, Carolina.
Hi.
Thanks for doing this with us. It's been wonderful. So I wish we could just ask you questions for like 6 more hours. Here we go. So back to I can't hear you when you're screaming. I cannot help but notice the line left by a bicycle through snow tells a story of where someone has been while expressing where they are going. It tells this story in silence, in a hollow form of line. It tells a story with impressions of hollow space, much like some of Mendietta's work. You seem to bring sound and volume to images that cannot speak, that articulate themselves without voice. Your poetry resonates in these hollow spaces. Is that a challenge you enjoy as a poet, to give body and voice to images while letting those images speak for themselves?
Yes, definitely. Letting the image speak for itself in a lot of ways is letting language do what it does. And, you know, in my language, I've tried to separate the poet from the poem, because the poem, as we know, is far more interesting than the poet, or smarter in making those connections. And so my job is to make a poem by selecting the right images, the right words, and trusting that the reader is going to come to the poem and see patterns that I never intended, that I perhaps don't see myself. Yeah, there's more I could say, but that'll do.
Okay, and then my second one, I actually was reading through, you asked me to talk about the interior earlier, and so this is more conceptual for you, but I noticed a line this morning. You write, "Reader, can we have a meaningful exchange without you knowing how I assemble heaven?" Mm. And is that, I guess, for you speaking to the reader, is it quite important, do you think, that the reader allows themselves to kind of be immersed in the mystery instead of trying to pick apart and understand what your motives were or where you're going, but to kind of go on that journey with you of not knowing?
Yes, yeah. I think of myself as not a very articulate person, which is why I turned to poetry, because poetry is a place that can house that mystery and uncertainty in the ways that John Keats talks about, the way he defines negative capability, which he came up with at like 23 or something. When do we ever trust 23-year-olds? I'm sorry, I hope that you guys are not offending anyone, because you are all kind of brilliant. But obviously brilliance comes at any age. But yes, I very much want to preserve that, and not often when I give a reading, I'll have to stop myself from apologizing for not speaking like an essay, or not, you know, people will often tell me your poetry is difficult or too ornate to be able to digest, but I don't think that poetry is meant to be digested in the way that rice is digested by the body. So I like that air of mystery very much. And I go to art and movies and music that creates a kind of atmosphere that I can wander. So I suppose that I myself too want to be that kind of maker. Yeah, those are great questions, Michael. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, Carolina, I think that is our time. Went by really quick.
It did. I was trying to keep time.
It went by really fast, but Thank you for talking with us. It was, how do I say this? It was really nice to spend time with students who had never read your work and to like get out of the classroom, get out of like the context of grades and assignments, and just sit and talk with work and like be confused and ask each other things and point things out to each other. Barrett and I, after that kind of class outside of class that we were talking about the packet with everyone, we were just saying like, so why can't this be what our jobs is like all the time? Because it was so wonderful. And then to hear your voice again, and then to hear some of those questions that we had just kind of being answered as you were reading. I think the poem feels clearer to me when I hear you read it. I love that. I can't wait for this next book. It's going to be wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You guys are all so lucky to have Barrett and Nick, and then for you guys to have these wonderful students. I'm pretty jealous in a good way.
They're pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Barrett. This is what teaching should be. Whatever else.
I mean, yeah. It was so funny because both Nick and I think as we were talking with our students about your poems, I think the two of us for a second forgot we were the professors, and we were kind of geeking out with the same verbosity and energy about your poems as they were, which was really exciting. And I think the two of us too were kind of enchanted by seeing language reinvigorated through its interrogation, almost like poems that perform that so movingly. It was just such a great occasion for us to kind of gather around your poems and talk about those kind of concepts with these very smart young writers. So we thank you endlessly for that and for your time tonight too. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, say hi to the boys for me, okay?
I will. I hope to meet your family sometime.
Next time you're in Chicago, please let me know, okay?
Okay.
We'll figure out a way for you to get here.
All right.
All right.
Sounds great. All right. Bye, everyone.
Good evening.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.